Good afternoon and welcome to our new series, Conversations with President Novak, where we spend 45 minutes learning from alumni and friends who have distinguished themselves in a variety of fields. During this pandemic, it seems more important than ever that we continue to learn from each other, open ourselves to new perspectives, and glean insight on important matters of the day. Today, we are grateful to be joined by J. Leon Washington, a Dakota Wesleyan University graduate of the class of 1972. Leon has had a distinguished 43-year career in higher education and currently serves as the Dean of Enrollment at Villanova University. Previously, Leon has held positions at Lehigh University, the University of California, Davis, Oberlin College, Amherst College, and Iowa State University, among others. Leon's successful career has been recognized nationally, and we are privileged to have him join us today to talk about race and higher education, among a variety of other topics. For those of you who are joining us on this live webinar, I want to provide a few guidelines for how this will operate. For the first 30 minutes, I will be asking Leon a variety of questions. You are welcome to use the question and answer function located at the bottom of your screen to ask a question. At the 30-minute mark, I will pose some of the questions which you have asked to Leon. We will conclude the session at 12:45 Central Time. I will let you know that where Leon is currently located in Pennsylvania, the hurricane is pounding his home. So the reliability of internet may at times be challenged. We're attentive to this, and should we need to close the webinar early, we will do so. With that, we will begin. Leon, welcome to our first in the series of Conversations with President Novak. Let's just begin by helping us understand a little bit about what is happening at Villanova today, and maybe what are one or two key challenges that you see facing the university as you start this fall.
Yes, well, thank you, Amy, and good afternoon. As probably is the case around the country, we are struggling with what to do with fall semester rapidly approaching. And we started out with 13 different plans about how to proceed. And we got that down to 9 different plans, including things like being closed all during the fall and only opening in January, or only asking freshmen to be on campus and all 3 other classes staying at home, and so forth and so on. And we now are working on 3 plans that would help us with what ifs. At this point, we are thinking of opening on the 17th of this month and waiting with bated breath as we plan for rapid testing of all members of the campus community and welcoming the class in ways that we really never thought we'd ever have to do before. And it has given us a whole new adage. We used to hear years ago that you can't teach old dogs new tricks. I will tell you, this old dog has learned so many new tricks in the last few days. And so we're trying to see if those tricks work.
Wonderful. Well, naturally, situations like this require us to really demonstrate leadership in new and sometimes different ways. Can you tell me a little bit about what does good leadership look like to you?
When I think about leadership, I think that, well, first and foremost, I think most human beings have leadership qualities. However, leaders, strong leaders, what they have in common is an innate ability to have and create vision. And in so doing, good, strong leaders with that vision can ignite the passion of others. And once that passion is ignited, others can buy into that vision and follow accordingly.
Wonderful. You were the first Black member of an all-white high school. Tell us about that experience and maybe share with us one or two key takeaways that you took from that experience.
Well, it all started because when my family moved from Miami, Florida, to my father's hometown in Hampton County, South Carolina, I used to always pass this school that was sitting up on a hill, surrounded by a beautiful white picket fence and a big antebellum gate that sprung open. And I would always say to my dad, I want to go to that school. And he would always say, well, you can't. And he never explained why. And then as time passed and I grew, I learned why that Blacks were not allowed, and that there was a thing called segregation. And then in 1965, when the Civil Rights Bill was enacted, I got the opportunity. We were living at that time in New York City. So I asked my parents if I could go back and live with my grandparents in South Carolina so that I could go to that school. And I went down early, spoke to one of my cousins and another friend, and the three of us decided that that's what we would do. And so the three of us were the first to integrate Wade Hampton High School in Hampton, South Carolina. I was the only senior. My cousin was a sophomore, and the friend was a ninth grader. And it was quite an experience. Our first 2 weeks or so, we had FBI escorts and police escorts. And I remember that very, very first day, both sides of the walkway were lined with angry people, and I'm not even sure what they were screaming. All I know is that they were screaming. But anyway, we went through all of that. And I got through the year, in good form. And I guess the takeaway from that for me was that when persons don't know whom you are, it is difficult for them to make a decision about you. And in our society, we are set up in a way that we're still, even now, so separate. And so we don't know each other. And so we make assumptions about other people based on where we are in that context. And so I learned that we all have to work at communication. That was probably the most effective thing. It's talking, telling a person, sharing our stories. And each of us has one, and that those stories are rich. And what makes them rich is that difference, and that difference is impactful. And I think once we buy into that, things become okay after that. And I've always taken that with me. It is that lesson I learned about sharing my story and helping people see that different is not frightening. That difference is just that, different.
Absolutely. Today, obviously, in higher ed and across our country, we're once again, and probably have been engaged in profound conversations about race and strengthening our appreciation of difference. We also might recognize that the data would confirm systemic racism still exists. In what ways, as a higher education leader, have you seen higher education work to address systemic racism? And what strategies would you encourage leaders, even at your own institution, to adopt as we move forward and attempt to make progress in this space?
Well, we certainly have had some great changes. I think the whole issue of access has improved. We're seeing many more Black and brown children coming into higher education and successfully completing degrees and going on to do great things in our society. However, there is a lot that still needs to be done. One of the things I think that we in higher education perhaps could do better, and that is we need to really listen. We need to listen with intent, with passion, with sympathy, and with empathy. And we need to hear the voice and then acknowledge where others are coming from. And I think once we do that, we can move forward. And that's what higher ed needs to do. I think our administration, our faculty, really needs to listen to the voices of the young women and men who are coming. Those who say, I don't feel welcome. I don't feel like I belong. Ask them, what does that mean? What would make you feel welcome and that you belong? Really understand what that is. And then I think we also need to admit that we indeed do have a problem. Way back in 1963, when Bobby Kennedy said that the issue of race and racism was going to be the destruction of our nation, we're still seeing that so many years later. And so I think we must listen and be willing to hear the voice and then respond accordingly.
Leon, I know you have children and beautiful grandchildren. What advice would you give them as people of color today, people who are brown and Black, about how they address the issues that they might confront in their world?
One of the things that my grandmother used to always tell me, and like most young people, I would halfway listen. but as I grew older, I understood what she was trying to say. And she would say, one of the greatest assets that God gave humans was the ability to be flexible. And she used to tell me this story about geese, turtles, and waterfalls. And there was a lesson in each of those. Geese had all that strategic sight and vision, and just by a sound, they would line up all the other geese in flight, and they had a different sound if it was danger, a different sound if there was food or water or whatever. And then turtles had tenacity. And she said, you know, you bother a turtle, he'll go into his shell and he'll stay there. He can stay there for days. And, you know, so that tenacious spirit. And then the third thing, she says, waterfall. It's fluid and it's flexible. And then she said, the real lesson is that the waterfall is the greatest of the three because of that flexibility. She said, because that which is flexible bends and that which is brittle breaks. And I used to say, forget it, you know. But as I got older and as I started to have children, that's what I taught. Flexibility is so important. It gets you out of a lot of things. It also allows you to understand other people's points of view. And so that's what I teach, flexibility.
And that's probably a very good attribute to have as you start a fall with a lot of uncertainty and unknown at Villanova.
Absolutely.
Leon, as you reflect on your 43 years in higher education, what is an accomplishment you're most proud of?
That's a tough one. I mean, there are, I guess probably the thing that I'm most proud of is that I have been able to help institutions across the country see the common in uncommon situations. We have encountered numerous students whose profiles did not fit the profile of the institution, for example. And as I think of this, I'm thinking of a situation I had at Amherst where I had met a student on the train, and he had so impressed me that I had encouraged him to apply. And when his application came in, the dean had said to me, absolutely not, the profile is just too far off. And I accepted that because he was my boss. And then at the end of the admission process, one day in a staff meeting, the dean said, each of you can go back into the pool and bring in anybody you want from the pool. And as soon as he said that, he regretted it because he looked at me and he said, no, no. And I said, yes, you promised. And so he said, if you bring him in, you're going to have to be his mentor all the way through this. And I did it. And it was the greatest thing that I'd ever done. This young man came in and took the place by storm. And long and short of the story, went on to become a medical doctor. And at some point in his career became the chief surgeon at Walter Reed Army Hospital. And so that was the so uncommon, but I could see the common in that. And that common thread was a young person who had passion and who had strength and who had ability. And I've taken that from institution to institution and have been able to allow institutions to really look at young people from all walks of life and allow them access and allow them a chance at success.
That's wonderful and admirable. And I would just say thank you for that perspective and always looking at people and seeing what might that potential be. I think in higher ed, that's a critical part of what we need to do to continue to strengthen it. During this time of so much uncertainty and upheaval, where are you seeing hope play out on your campus? And what is inspiring you about what you're seeing?
Well, first and foremost, I think our young people have the uncanny ability to find hope, I think, in some of the most dire situations. I recall talking to a young person one day when I was very stressed. He had come in to see me about an issue that he had, and I had helped him resolve that. And he looked at me and he said, you seem down, not like your old self. And I said, oh, I'm just under a little bit of stress right now. And he looked at me and he said, is it something I can help you with? And I said, no. And then he says, is it something you can solve today? And I said, no. Then he said, is it something you can solve tomorrow? And I said, no. Then he said, is it something you can solve a few weeks from now? And I thought about it and I said, no. And then he said, then why are you worrying about it today? Why don't you wait? And I wanted to just punch him because, I mean, that was, in the end, that was brilliant. Why am I stressing out over it today if I already know that I can't do anything about it until at least 30 days from now? and so it's that kind of hope, I guess, I see in our youth. Every time I think that, all is lost, I talk to a young person and I hear their dreams and I hear their aspirations, and I leave that so invigorated and so ready to go and so wishing I had another 100 years. So it is that's where I get my hope, is in the visions of our youth.
I think those of us who have the privilege of working in higher ed find that every day they sort of renew us. And
Yes.
so the reality of hoping to see them back here in a couple of weeks, I think invigorates all of us, because they are so committed to strengthening our collective future, and through their own pathways and their own strategies, but they are committed to living a stronger and more vibrant life and building a stronger and more vibrant society. So, Leon, what are you reading these days?
Well, given the complexities we're facing right now, it sort of puts me back in the mindset of the 1960s, during the heartbeat of the civil rights movement, after George Floyd's death and other situations of that similar sort. So at the moment, I'm reading Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility. And the reason I'm reading it is I'm finding that it is helping me help my allies and my friends and my neighbors engage in the conversation. And while it's a tough conversation, it's a very necessary and needed conversation, and one that we should have had a long time, and one that should be ongoing in all circles. And so I'm reading that, and I'm also going back and reading some of the old things that used to inspire me when I was a college-age student. I always loved J.D. Salinger. And a part of it is I was living in New York at a time when he wrote quite a number of essays in the New Yorker. And of course, like most high schoolers, read Catcher in the Rye and then reread it also in college. And I so identified with Caulfield, much like Salinger, with him as the main character, talked about how the war had impacted him. I think the civil rights movement impacted me in lots of ways too. And so I felt I had a kinship. So I've gone back and I've read that. And then I've also dusted off another book that I found quite inspiring. It's a book by Andrew Hacker. And it's outdated a bit, but I think it's very relevant. It's called Two Nations, Black and White, Separate, Hostile, and Unequal. And what grabs me about this book is Dr. Hacker, seems like he was here at the moment looking at a landscape and describing that landscape for us. And so I really get inspired just thinking about that vision that he had. And then, of course, Brave New World. Who would have thought? I'm sure Aldous Huxley's bones are turning over in the grave, because, oh my gosh, this is a brave new world and some. And to have had that vision so long ago. And then I read some things for fun too. One of my real favorite authors is Louise Erdrich, and she wrote The Beat Queen. My daughter and I, we love that book, and we probably read it 5 to 6 times, and we talk about it a lot. But yeah, and then of course I have to read all of the boring stuff for my job.
That's quite a collection of things. You mentioned as part of that as you've gone back and done some of those readings in the past, you've been inspired by the civil rights movement and some of the conversation that was happening even then. How do you take and translate that to what's happening today? And what actions would you be encouraging on your campus related to some of that?
Mm-hmm. Well, I really think that, and this is just my opinion, I don't think we should burn down monuments and tear down statues. And the reason I don't think that is they really are part of the history, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I think that we should tell the story, with all of that in mind. And so what I would encourage institutions to do currently is that we need to rewrite the narrative. We need to retell the history, and we all need to be a part of it. And we need to talk about even that dark part of our history and why we're better today because we had that time in the past, and how we're going to be even better and different in the future because, we don't want to go back. We don't want to repeat what was there. And I think that's what we need to do in terms of our higher ed institutions. That's what I would recommend. And I would also recommend that we, again, listen to the stories.
I think sometimes as I've listened to people in a rural part of South Dakota who often don't encounter race in the way that others might, right? There's this sensitivity about how do I even start a conversation, or how do I even play a role in changing the systemic racism that we know has been part of our history and continues today. What advice would you give to a Caucasian living in the middle of rural South Dakota about ways that they can more proactively address issues of systemic racism?
Mm-hmm. I would say to begin the conversations based on things that you like, that you really embrace. For example, your faith. Talk about what that means, and how does the intersection of your faith meet with other kinds of things that are happening in your country, in your world, in other communities, things that you read in the newspapers, and go from there. I mean, it just builds from there. Also, to focus on how exciting it will be to embrace difference and learn from someone who has a point of view that's different than your own. Not that you have to buy into it. You don't even have to agree with it. You only have to listen to it. I mean, that is kind of what humans do. Human communities are supposed to be vibrant and changing and dynamic. In fact, anthropologists say the only ones that aren't are graveyards. But the living ones, that's how they're supposed to be. And we're supposed to wrestle and fight and disagree and agree and love and not love and so forth. It's a time and a place for all of those things. And I think we overthink it sometimes. And so I would encourage any individual, no matter where they might live, just don't overthink it. It's much more simple than that. It gets down to the common things like love, like faith, like hope, like happiness, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. I know in the book you mentioned white fragility. They talk a lot about being that active listener, entering the conversation from a place that recognizes As a Caucasian, I might not understand your experience. Why do you think that's so difficult for people to have that conversation?
Mm-hmm. My opinion is that it's our society. I don't know that we as a society have ever embraced the fact that we were founded on very racist principles. And anybody who knows anything about Alcoholics Anonymous knows that the alcoholic can only be helped when he or she admits, I am an alcoholic. And I don't know that our country has ever acknowledged the fact that racism exists. Mm-hmm. I think that's where we need to start. We need to get comfortable with saying, you know, I'm sorry, not a good thing, but racism exists. Yeah. And I think once we do that, then we can say the next thing. Grandma used to tell me, it's not what you did yesterday, it's what you do next. That's what's so key. What you do next. Forget about what we did before. What are we going to do next?
Absolutely. And I appreciate that insight and that advice. And I think it does begin by just acknowledging it exists. Bias exists. We make judgments about others. And that presents part of this challenge. I know you've mentioned on a number of occasions your grandmother. Mm-hmm. And you shared some of the advice that she had, the geese, the turtles, the waterfall, etc. What's the best piece of advice that you've received?
I remember I had this grandmother I refer to all the time. I had her until she was 105. Oh. And she was 102 before she started to slip away. And she had a fall, broke her hip, and went down from there. But anyway, she was a sassy little thing. 8th grade education, but a PhD in mother wit. And I guess the thing I learned most from her is she would always say, be yourself and embrace your faith. Those would be the two things, and probably the two most things I learned from her. One of the last conversations I had with her was in 1995. I was on the staff at San Jose State University, and I had come to visit her in Garnett, South Carolina. And I sat there talking to her, lamenting all of the issues that I was going through in my life and how the world was beating up on me. And I expected she would say, oh, baby, and, you know, give me some sympathy. And she just looked at me and she said, boy, where is your faith? So that was grandma. And so being myself and having faith, I think, were the two most precious lessons I got from her.
I want to pry into that a little bit more, but before I do that, I want to invite those of you who are joining us today to feel free to go down to the question and answer box located at the bottom of your screen and submit any questions for Leon in our remaining minutes here. So please feel free to submit questions and we will ask him. Let's go back to talking about your faith. Tell us about the role that has played in your life and what it means to work at an institution in which faith is a core component.
Mm-hmm. I really think that it's my faith that has been the guiding principle for all that I do. And I had worked at a number of institutions, but this is my first opportunity to work in a faith-based institution. And I'm finding it keeps me grounded. It keeps me real. It also gives me hope. It makes me it makes me know that I am working on mission. This is my ministry. This is what I am supposed to do. This is why I'm able to do it well. This is why I have passion for it. And I don't know that I've ever had a day when I've gotten up and regretted or felt like, oh, I don't feel like going and doing this today. In fact, I live for the morning so I can do it. And so I think that is due to my faith.
Absolutely. I know that you're someone who I have always admired for your positivity, your hopefulness, and you shared how youth are inspiring you today. Can you tell us about a leader that has been inspiring to you as well?
Mm-hmm. There have, of course, been many. However, I would say the most memorable for me is someone who is probably not commonly known by others, but her name is Michael Melton Graham III. And yes, her dad wanted a son, but she is a native of Kentucky. And one of the first things she taught me was that it was Louisville. And then the other thing that she taught me is that never let them see you sweat. And that the best information after the fact isn't worth, and in her words, a good goddamn. And so I have always carried that with me. But anyway, Michael was the CEO of the Human Resources Department at Union Carbide Corporation back in the day when that company existed. And she hired me to work in human resources. And my job was to look for young aspiring scientists who could ultimately be hired at Union Carbide, and even gave me an opportunity to go and work in Brazil with her at one of Carbide's plants there. And so Michael was just an aspiring person. I mean, she would storm into your office on any given day and say, I've got this idea. And then 2 hours later, your walls would be plastered with sticky notes of all of these ideas. And she would take all of those with her. And the next thing you know, a proposal would be born, or some other magic project would be born. And I now am able to do a lot of that with my staff and have done it over the years. And I find that very inspiring.
Wonderful. I'm going to go to a few of the questions that have come in from those who are listening. What is your most distinctive memory of your time at Dakota Wesleyan?
Wow. Oh, there were many. But I guess the most distinctive has to be the fact that every single night the Lord sent, we would pile into, almost no one had vehicles back then, but the few vehicles that were there. And we loved the young men from Minnesota and the Dakotas because most of them had pickup trucks. And we could all just pile into the back of the truck. And it didn't make any difference whether it was 4 below zero or not. And we would all go down to, it was I-90 truck stop during those days. And we would have a late night snack, burger, etc. And I tell you, that's probably the most memorable because you didn't know who would meet up and go. And I met lots of people who were so different than I was. And I found that very inspiring.
Absolutely. Would you mind sharing with the members who are joining us today your initial impression when you came off the train and you arrived here from the middle of New York City?
Oh my goodness. Well, I came in January and it was on a very cold day, and North Central Airlines had a plane that everyone called I think it was something like the spruce goose or the blue goose or a gray goose or something of that sort. I know it was goose. And so we flew in from Sioux Falls to Mitchell, and I had on this ankle length midi coat that was black, and I had an afro that was huge and a baker's cap leaning to the side. And my roommates were two young men, one from Pembina, North Dakota, and the other from Iowa. And I remember arriving on campus, it was snowing, and some people were helping me with my luggage. They had met me at the airport, and we walked into the room and they put my suitcases down, and I looked at them and they looked at me, and I had what I call my oh my God moment. Oh my God. But and the looks on their faces told me that they had the same. But that was the first memory. But shortly after that, I knew that I had made the right decision.
Absolutely. We have one remaining question here from someone who's in the audience. In your opinion, is racism always systemic, or can it be localized or individualized?
Wow, that's a really good question. In my opinion, certainly not always systemic. However, commonly systemic because our systems were built on platforms that continues to benefit racial stereotypes and the like. I think it is often driven out of fear, and it's often fear of the unknown. And I say that because we were in a rough time back in the 1960s when several of us came to Dakota Wesleyan. And in fact, Dakota Wesleyan intentionally had, I think there were 12 African-American students. At first, 6 men and 6 women, and that was very intentional. Everyone thought that we would meet up and be dance partners and date partners, etc. And it doesn't happen that way, you see. I think belief systems are such that when they don't intersect, the intersectionality of other beliefs, of other cultures, of other races in this case, of other peoples, of other points of view, that is when the communication then breaks down, and then as a result, racism enters in.
Very thoughtful words. We just have one last minute here, Leon, before our session finishes. Any parting thoughts that you have about where we're headed?
Mm-hmm. Well, of course, I'm always the glass half full. And I'm always, at my age, when I wake up, I know that I've cheated the devil and I have yet another day. So I'm hopeful. We're going to get through this. We're going to get through, and my grandchildren, I think, are going to see a day when we're able to talk about things like racism as a thing, not necessarily of the past, but certainly a thing that we all know how to deal with, and that we're able to make progress and deal with it I would say, inappropriate ways. So I'm hopeful that we're on a good trajectory and that we are going to do just fine.
Leon, thank you so much for your thoughtful insight. You are always an inspiration. And thank you to all of you who joined us today for this first in a series of conversations. We look forward to having you join us on a quarterly basis as we invite leaders from a variety of industry sectors to offer their insight as we think about a connected and global future. Thank you again for joining us here at Dakota Wesleyan, and we wish you all the best of a blessed day.
Thank you.